Good afternoon. It's just gone 1 o'clock on Friday, the 8th of August, 2025. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Charles Malet, and I have with me in the studio today Patrick Henningsen. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Charles.
Good stuff. And we're going to be joined, I'm pleased to say, by Kit Klarenberg of the Grey Zone, who is in Belgrade, Serbia at the moment. And we will also have another contribution from Will Coleshill with one of his Willsy reports. Now, in the programme today, we're going to be looking at threat analysis by Dutch intelligence, particularly pertaining to Israel, also how the crossing of small boats is being weaponised on all sides of the political debate, as well as a look back at the events as they unfolded in the former Yugoslavia 30 years ago. We'll be covering the sabotage in the Baltic and the intelligence picture as it's seen by Russia, as well as the continuing battle or indeed interaction between artificial intelligence and free speech, and then on to Presidents Trump and Putin. Will they meet or won't they? And then a look at the battle lines being drawn in space. As I say, there'll be Willsy reporting from a recent event showcasing what's going on in young and inquiring minds, and then a piece on the continued plundering of the natural landscape and denial of access to it. But first, because it is a story that we've covered a lot over the last few weeks, a story that relates to the proscription of Palestine Action, the group now deemed to be a terrorist entity, and the Crown Prosecution Service have announced charges under Section 13 of the Terrorism Act 2000 of individuals from the 5th of July, the very day that Palestine Action was prescribed, for, quote, showing support for prescribed terrorist organisation Palestine Action. Now, Section 13, as we will have referenced before, concerns wearing of clothing and the display of articles. And the use of language here is undoubtedly designed to be enormously subjective. So this is from the legislation itself, and this is the wearing of clothing or using articles in such a way or in such circumstances as to arouse reasonable suspicion that he is a member or supporter of a prescribed organisation. So you can see where that can go. Now, for contrast, and indeed to maintain distance from the case as warned to do so by the CPS themselves, we're going to look at a tweet by Alistair Campbell from his Rest is Politics talk show, and this deals with Section 12, which of course is relevant to other means of support to a prescribed organisation. But the tweet here shows a picture of the now president of Syria, a known terrorist in his capacity as head of HTS, a subset of Al-Qaeda, but very clearly being supported by Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart. I wrote to Counter-Terrorism Police about this very issue and received no reply. So just to point out the specifics on Section 12, which says that a person commits an offence if he arranges, manages or assists in arranging or managing a meeting which he knows is to support a prescribed organisation, to further the activities of a prescribed organisation, or to be addressed by a person who belongs to or professes to belong to a prescribed organisation. Clearly, no action taken there, but when it comes to three people apparently supporting Palestine Action via the wearing of clothing, a completely different matter. I don't think anybody listening or watching will be enormously surprised by that, but it is nonetheless something that's very important to keep track of. So that's where we're going to start the programme.
And I think providing public relations support for the former deputy head of ISIS probably should fall under that.
One would think so.
Arbitrarily
or indeed
speaking.
hope so. Yes, exactly. But I'll now hand over to Patrick for the next update, as I say, concerning the Dutch intelligence.
Sure. This is an interesting story, and we're going to be welcoming Kit Klarenberg in a moment to talk about it. But just going on to the situation at hand, the National Coordinator for Security and Counterterrorism in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam here. This is under the Ministry of Justice and Security. Look at what's happened here. Israel has been declared a, quote, terror threat. Pretty unbelievable. And I want to point people to this article here. I'm somewhat surprised to see this, but there seems to be a slow-moving trend around Europe and little baby steps in terms of putting and isolating Israel into a corner. Dutch intelligence flags Israel as a, quote, state threat. Kit Klarenberg, this is up at Global Delinquents. This is Kit's Substack publication here. Go up to Substack, just type in Kit Klarenberg or global delinquents, and he'll bring you right to his archive here. Pretty unbelievable. I want to bring onto the program right now Kit Klarenberg. He's also editor of the Grey Zone UK. He's also published in a number of excellent publications like Mint Press News and others. Kit, welcome to the program. Kit, explain to us how this came about. I find this to be extraordinary, especially considering the really strident and aggressive rhetoric by European leaders in support of Israel since October 7th, 2023. Explain to us what's happening, Kit.
Well, I mean, it's a pretty extraordinary development, but I mean, NCTV, which is Amsterdam's counter-terror intelligence agency, every single year it publishes an assessment of quote-unquote state threats to the Netherlands, and it has named Israel as a threat to the Netherlands for the very first time. And this comes at a time when Amsterdam is also leading the charge within the EU against Israel, calling for a reappraisal of the EU's relationship with Israel, calling for the end of trade with Israel, and among other measures. It must be stated that the Netherlands has historically been very pro-Israeli and has served as a key nucleus for Israeli lobbying within Europe and beyond. The Netherlands is home to a number of very powerful EU, UN organizations, and therefore has been a kind of jumping off point for the Zionist entity for a very long time and its lobbying work. So this is a pretty, as I say, a pretty extraordinary development.
And we're going to bring one of those shady organizations here. I'll bring this up on screen. The NGO Monitor, adorned with EU flags, but on closer inspection, just going to the contact page, this is actually based in Jerusalem, in Israel. This is one of those instruments you're referring to, Kit, based in Israel, but very active and organizing activities against Palestinian support in countries like the Netherlands, which you pointed out in your article. Go ahead, Kit.
Yeah, sure. So it's like, I mean, as I mentioned, that because the Netherlands is home to all of these powerful international institutions, including, of course, the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, ensuring that there is a friendly environment locally in political terms is of utmost importance to Tel Aviv. And for many, many, many years, they have systematically sought to neutralize any trace of Palestine solidarity in the country. This has extended to cyber attacks on prominent Palestine solidarity activists, physical threats, all manner of skullduggery, but most prominently, smear campaigns. You mentioned NGO Monitor. NGO Monitor, and the Dutch government has acknowledged this. It routinely smears anyone or anything that is remotely critical of Israel, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, which are, of course, mainstream darlings that can't really be depended upon for an accurate an accurate view of human rights in the world. The slightest criticism of Israel, these people and organizations get smeared as anti-Semitic and in bed with Hamas. And this has been a very, very successful, devastatingly successful strategy that has been deployed over and over and over again. Over the years, it has led to organizations having to shut down. NGO Monitor has successfully lobbied the Dutch government to cut funding for Palestinian organizations. The current kind of volte-face, for want of a better word, on Amsterdam's part is unprecedented, and I do think that it could lead to a wider unraveling of the Zionist lobby's influence throughout Europe, because increasingly governments are waking up to the fact that yes, the Israeli lobby is a deeply mephitic influence on politics and society. The report in question from NCTV, it hones in on what I would consider it was shocking, but it was a relatively minor chapter in the Dutch Israeli lobby's litany of shame, actually, where in late 2024 there were riots in Amsterdam by Israeli football hooligans. The Tel Aviv moved very quickly to try and shape media and political narratives around what happened. To try and frame it as a kind of Nazi-style pogrom, when in reality a bunch of thuggish far-right Israeli football club ultras turned up in Amsterdam specifically to cause trouble. They tore down Palestinian flags. They attacked Muslim residents of the city, of which there are a great many, including women, and they chanted absolutely repulsive, racist, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim slogans and cheered on the IDF. Yes, in the scheme of things, this is relatively minor. But the NCTV has finally acknowledged that this is deeply problematic because, yes, there are a wide variety of political and media figures who ignored the fact that the Israelis had specifically come to make trouble and framed what happened as this completely unprovoked attack on Jews because they were Jews. The mayor of Amsterdam, yes, likened what happened to Crystal Night and Nazi pogroms in general. It was quite extraordinary, and the root cause of this was the Israeli government circulating extremely dodgy dossiers to MPs and journalists with a very specific framing of what happened.
Indeed. And also, just to add to what Kit was saying about the trend real quickly here, Netherlands notifies Israel to call to suspend a trade agreement, a trade association agreement. So that's part of that European trend, Charles. So things are gradually moving. But thank you, Kit, for that.
Absolutely,
report.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. And just sticking with the theme brought out there of sort of whipping up tensions, this is absolutely something that's been going on over on this side of the channel, with both the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary talking tough, one might say, on what they're describing as smuggling gangs, suggesting that they are indeed taking action, that people are being detained and all the rest of it. Of course, a year ago, this was very much a political and social flashpoint, as it's becoming this summer. And the main point here is that they're shifting focus from the policy of migration and concentrating on a very, very small detail, which they're describing as these smuggling gangs, rather than focusing on the area of concern in the country, which of course is the migrants themselves and indeed where they're going and where they've come from. But the intent here to stoke fear and division. But we'll just listen to what the Home Secretary had to say on the matter, and please listen with a questioning ear and think whether or not you do endorse exactly what it is that she's saying.
Well, the pilot has now begun, and the first migrants who arrived on small boat are now in detention. That is the first step to removing them to France, because no one should be making this journey in the first place. And that's why this is now starting the process to return people and to undermine this vile trade in people.
No, it's very obviously a political football, and it's being kicked all over the park. And I think the other point to make here is that across the political spectrum, it's very, very obvious that the drive here is towards digital identity. That is the proposed solution to this particular problem, and it's just going to be sold in a number of different ways. Patrick, you've got a bit more on this and how it's being reported.
It's also about cultivating electoral support for the next administration here. Nigel Farage, accused of fanning the flames by his nemesis at the Mirror here. We'll bring this up on screen for a moment. Nigel Farage fanning the flames of hatred, dangerous claims of a cover-up. So another sort of Stockport-style cover-up accusation here. Labour MP from Dover and Deal, Mike Tapp, basically calling him a fake patriot, exploiting divisions of hate for his own political gain. And this is what Nigel Farage said on Monday. And again, talk about fanning the flames. I mean, this one just keeps going. What caused unrest in our streets after Stockport last year was us not being told by the police that the status of the attacker in Stockport. That led to crazy conspiracy theories spreading online. So he's basically saying that it's really not the mob's fault for rioting, and it's not our fault for egging on the mob. It's the fault of the police for not disclosing the ethnicity and the religion of the assailant. So they're trying to rewrite the rules of criminal justice to basically say, give succor to an angry mob. And Douglas Murray made the same exact argument at the time to justify his egging on of the mob, as did Tommy Robinson. Yep. So we're seeing this this pattern develop.
Absolutely, playing out exactly like it did last year. And just to qualify, that is Southport, not Stockport.
Stockport, yes.
But okay, now what we're going to do is take advantage of having Kit on the programme. And indeed, as I mentioned at the opening, the events in Yugoslavia 30 years ago were very much dominating the headlines. And Patrick, you're going to give us more on that.
Well, yes, and we're looking at, we'll bring this up on screen here. The Yugoslavian War, obviously, people should understand that's 1991, to 1999. Sorry, typographic error there. But just to reiterate what the map looked like at the time, the breakup of Yugoslavia here, and they're talking in the news about the 30 years since Croatia's, quote, War of Independence. This is German state media, of course, but other outlets in Europe are saying something different. 30 years on, Operation Storm still divides the Balkans. And here I want to direct people to Kit Klarenberg's piece here at the Gray Zone. U.S.-backed ethnic cleansing of Serbs, top diplomat secretly told Croat leader. Let's bring Kit Klarenberg back onto the stage to talk about this. Kit, interesting development here, new documents, new information, or information that hasn't been looked at, but maybe was there. Explain to us what's behind this story. Mute.
You.
Mike.
So, yeah, sure. So August 4th marked the 30th anniversary, of Operation Storm, which is, very few people in the West know about. I'm quite surprised that there's been any critical media coverage of this whatsoever in the mainstream, but as you just demonstrated. But yeah, it's little known outside the former Yugoslavia, but it was a US planned military strike, which removed the entirety of Croatia's Serbian population, which is 300,000 people. Many were forced to flee on foot. The elderly and infirm who couldn't run away basically just got killed, and all of their property was either burned to the ground or stolen by Croatian forces. And yeah, it was the product of the US backing neo-Nazi forces and using them as quote unquote junkyard dogs to break up Yugoslavia. Does this sound familiar at all, to what's currently happening, or what the Western powers planned to happen in Donbass, but hasn't really worked out since February 2022, if not, February 2014, when the Ukrainian government was overthrown by a CIA, NED, MI6 coup?
Yes. Yeah. Well, the blitzkrieg that was planned that Russia intervened to prevent on February 25th, 2022. Of course, that's totally denied by the West. But Madeleine Albright and the entire U.S. foreign policy apparatus was very anti-Serb. So they're denying a Nakba, effectively, of the Serbian population in Croatia. That's effectively what happened there. And it's interesting. We'll bring up on screen here. This is Richard, we'll bring this up, a diplomat from the United States, Richard Holbrooke, who was a leading U.S. diplomat at the time, admits, we said publicly that we were concerned, but privately, you knew what we wanted. And he's talking here to, I believe, he's had a conversation with Tudjman, I believe was the leader in Croatia at the time. So it's admitted, Kit, the United States backed an actual pogrom in Europe not so long ago, 30 years ago.
Yeah, well, it's again, it's quite remarkable because Franjo Tudjman was elected on an explicit platform of effectively removing Croatia's entire Serb population, which was hundreds of thousands of people on the campaign trail. He openly venerated the Ustasha, which was this kind of Nazi puppet state created in World War II by during the Axis invasion of Yugoslavia. They ruled with a brutality that shocked the Nazis themselves. They would do things like kill children by picking them up by the legs and smashing their heads into walls. They had dedicated camps for slaughtering women and children. Tudjman suggested that the Ustasha were a reflection of Croatia's desire for freedom and independence, and appointed several former Ustasha exiles to his government. Of course, this instilled fear in Croatia's non-Croat population. And yes, the Operation Storm represented the culmination of a plan that was laid well in advance, and the US not only was well aware of, but greenlit. It is celebrated today as Victory Day in Croatia, and you can see large crowds of people walking, often doing the Nazi salute as they do so in cities like Zagreb and Split. The parallels with the current conflict in Ukraine couldn't really be clearer, except that now the US is losing, which could well be on the verge of just total capitulation and leaving Ukraine to its own devices to be overrun by Russia. There have been reports that Putin and Trump are scheduled to speak next week. We shall see if anything comes of that. The US negotiating position is certainly not very strong, and the US empire isn't what it once was, in the mid-90s.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Kit. It's a very important story. It's also important to put this important historical event into context. So much of what's happened in Europe and the Balkans and now Ukraine, it's the West and Britain and some of the European NATO members always exploiting all of these tensions that arose during the early part and middle of the 20th century, and still trying to get mileage out of these divisions that were created from past wars. And it seems like they're coming to the end of this playbook. Hopefully that's the case.
Yeah, really important. And with such a sort of constant battering from the ever-evolving news cycle, people are so quick to forget. And I think that it's exactly right to make sure that people don't forget what's happened and do have an accurate version of events. So, Kit, thanks very much for that.
And now, that article is at the Grey Zone.
Yes, it is. And there'll be links. Sorry, all of this that's been referred to will be linked in the show notes. So do go there. And on that subject, delighted as we are to have you watching the news programme. I wonder how much use you're making of the UK Column website. And it really should be considered as a primary source for research. The search bar shown there at the top, and there is a wealth of information. I draw your attention particularly to the sections and indeed to the comment pieces there that are on the website. So a phenomenal resource, which really I would encourage you to make best use of. Now, also, we would be very pleased to have you on as a member, and indeed that is the only way in which we are able to fund what it is that we do through our membership subscriptions and indeed donations. So there's a big button there on the front page of the website helping you to do that. So please do consider joining us and becoming part of the family. Now, a very good interview went out yesterday with Escape Key, Ben Rubin, talking, the title of the interview there, Reverse Engineering the Architecture of Totalitarian Control. And if that sounds like a bit of a mouthful, essentially it's breaking down all the various things that people are seeing around them now and understanding where it's coming from. So a really important interview to get into there. Now, tonight we have the next instalment of the banter session, Germ Warfare, which is Mike Robinson and me talking to Germ. So please do enjoy that this evening. Then, as spoken about before, we've got the Hope Freedom Music Festival over the August bank holiday weekend. And if you have not yet got a ticket, then you're in luck, because with the discount code UKC20, you can get 20% off. So please do consider doing that. And we've actually got a video of Katie Jo and Sadie talking about the festival itself. So we'll just play you a quick clip of that.
The talk tent is back to back with fantastically inspirational speakers.
UK Column Takeover.
Saturday, Philly J. Lay, it's all about health on the Sunday. Monday is all about spirituality with Giles Bryant. You're going to walk away feeling uplifted, feeling amazing because you've been around like-minded people for a whole weekend. We are lucky we get to experience that all the time.
Yeah.
But if you haven't, or you don't get that very often, you need to fill up your tank of feel-good energy.
So get your tickets there. We will be there. Just to reiterate, we will absolutely be running that talk tent on the Saturday, and it'll be a phenomenal day and a phenomenal festival. So once you've got that out of the way and August has passed, the next thing to think about is October and indeed York, because we've got our next on-location event happening there, which is going to be an extremely exciting day. The focus of the day is going to be health, and we've got an amazing array of speakers, which we will be starting to announce soon. So make sure that you remain watching until the very end of the programme. Hint, hint. But it's going to be an in-person event with a great, absolutely lovely venue and a large audience in person, and there'll be an evening session as well, so you can join us for that too. But I would recommend that you get on with it because tickets are selling very quickly. We've sold well over half now, and we are expecting to sell that out. But don't worry, there is a live stream as well if you're unable to get there in person. Therefore, we have all the bases covered, or at least so we hope. Now, that concludes the ads for this news programme, and we're going to go to the Baltic, where I think, again, we're going to have to take a different perspective on what we're told by the British establishment, certainly, Patrick.
Well, yes, and you're not allowed to know a lot of this because it's in Russian media, which is verboten in Britain, but nonetheless, and we will be asking Kit Klarenberg to contribute on this discussion. But the UK accused by Russian intelligence of masterminding a sabotage campaign against Russia's shadow fleet of tankers and ships on the high sea doing trade and commerce here. This is a report we've got up at 21stcenturywire.com from our Global Affairs associate editor, Freddie Ponton. And this has got a lot of interesting positions in it that I think people need to consider. We're calling this the NATO Lake. Obviously, with the addition of Finland and Sweden, this has completely changed the security architecture of the Baltic environment, made it a lot more hostile for Russia. And this is a report by the Russian SRV, their intelligence services here. And this is interesting. NATO allies preparing for large-scale operations against Russia's so-called shadow fleet. And that's what's in here. There's the report. We've got the translation in PDF form, which you can go and read there. And also, what's also interesting about this, and this is where the conversation is going to get a little dicey. There's Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, and what's he saying here? Well, we'll bring on, actually, we're going to bring back a quote from Keir Starmer. There it is. "The threat from Russia to our national security cannot be underestimated," Starmer said. "That is why we will do everything in our power to destroy the shadow fleet operation, starve his war machine." So his shadow fleet, his war machine, so they're personalizing this to Vladimir Putin, like Saddam Hussein style and Gaddafi style, starve his war machine of oil revenues and protect the subsea infrastructure that we rely on for everyday lives. Charles, subsea infrastructure. What's the Nord Stream pipeline? Does that count as subsea infrastructure?
I mean, I'm certainly no expert, but I would think that it might fall into that category. Yes,
I find this to be quite unbelievable here, and this is dovetailing with this. Donald Trump's hitting India with 50% tariffs. 25 extra 50 in total for Russian oil purchases. So that's coming via Russia's, quote, shadow fleet. So this is a coordinated operation between the British and the Americans and NATO, full stop. Now, we've got a video here from Chris Donahue, NATO command of NATO land forces here. Listen very closely.
If you look at Kaliningrad, and it's, you can argue back and forth, but it's about 47 miles wide, surrounded by NATO on all sides. There's absolutely no reason why that A2AD bubble, to deter Russia, we cannot take that down from the ground in a time frame that is unheard of and faster than we've ever been able to do. We've already planned that, we've already developed it. The mass and momentum problem that Russia poses to us, a problem that we could get faced anywhere else in the world. We've developed the capability to make sure that we can stop that mass and momentum problem, approximately 22 divisions worth of capability. And then, of course, all of us have to make sure that we have offensive capability.
That was this week, Charles. That was this week. So a NATO commander openly advocating for offensive operations against Russia that would definitely trigger a potential thermonuclear exchange and World War III. Unbelievable here. And for further perspective on this, back in June, Kit Klarenberg published this with the Gray Zone: Secret British Plans to Defeat Entire Russian Black Sea Fleet Revealed in Leaks. So let me bring Kit back. Kit, so it's there's no secrets about what the agenda is here. Now they're doing this openly. Russia's not advocating to attack the United States openly, and how they're going to, take out the U.S. fleet in Hawaii or even in Bahrain, but yet NATO's doing this to Russia publicly. That plus what you've been sharing with us in the previous months, we'd like your perspective, Kit.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm amazed that first at Russia's restraint, but also the fact that it's taken them so long to publicly discuss the fact that Britain is behind all of this. I mean, in March 2022, there is an organisation known as the Council on Geostrategy, which is funded by the British Foreign Office and various defence contractors, and it published a report which openly stated that the Black Sea region was of significant importance to the UK geopolitically, and it advocated for assisting Ukraine in destroying Russia's Black Sea fleet. So, I mean, we didn't even need the leaks I reported on to know that Britain was behind this. Yes, there are numerous passages in the leaked files I reported on, which have very clear relevance to what's been going on. So, I mean, this didn't get much coverage in the Western or the English language media. But in February, there was a spate of explosions on tankers in the Mediterranean that had recently stopped at Russian ports and were ferrying Russian goods, particularly oil, around the world. Italian investigators, openly stated that they suspected that Ukraine was responsible for this. Now, in the leaked, in the leaked files that I reported on, there's all sorts of references to training the Ukrainians to use limpet, deep sea divers to attach limpet mines to Russian ships in the Black Sea to sink them. Of course, they're going to be using this capability elsewhere. What's interesting about the Ukraine's preponderant focus on attacking Russian shipping in the Black Sea is it actually has no battlefield benefit for them whatsoever. I mean, they might get a propaganda boost out of it, but it doesn't change the reality of the front line in Donbass. But they are expending, a large amount of people and resources, often on suicide missions, to try and attack Russian shipping, Russian military bases, and Russian territory in that region. As I've also reported for the Grey Zone, I mean, the entire Krinky operation, which was a catastrophic disaster ranking amongst one of the worst military disasters in modern history. This was all masterminded by the British. It was British-trained Ukrainian Marines who were doing the fighting and dying, mainly dying, using British equipment, and they were trained in Britain itself.
No, and to that point, TJ Coles, also for the Grey Zone here, just to remind people, from 2015, the UK has trained over 22,000 Ukrainian military personnel as a part of Operation Orbital Maritime Training Initiative. And this is all detailed in TJ Cole's book, Britain's Secret Wars, where he documents how the UK spent all this time and money and using the conflict and Stability Fund. I think there was some money allocated for that, maybe about 30 million during that period, 2017 to 2020. Conflict Stability and Security Fund. There's a lot of stuff that gets trafficked through that fund, as you know, Charles. And if you want to look at the book, TJ Cole's Britain's Secret Wars, excellent book. And we were both at the same university doing postgraduate research as well, so in Plymouth And TJ Coles is a fantastic top flight researcher. I just wanted to point that out. But I want to bring Kit back. Just say, Kit, thank you very much for joining us. And we hope we'll follow your work on Substack as well as the Gray Zone. And hopefully we'll be able to talk to you again soon.
My pleasure. Cheers, guys.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That's Kit Klarenberg. Follow him on Substack, also at The Gray Zone. He's editor of The Gray Zone UK, sister publication of The Gray Zone in the US.
Yeah, super. Yeah, excellent contribution there from Kit, and we're very grateful for it. Also worth pointing out that Orbital actually was a land initiative as well, and of course led into Op Interflex, which we've talked about a lot. And of course that's drawn a huge amount of not just money away from other defence projects in the UK, but also an enormous number of people to run the training program. So it's
and by the way, Charles,
amazing.
How many of those people trained? How many of those young Ukrainian men are still alive?
Well, I
that
can
have
tell
gone
you,
through that program.
Funnily enough, I can tell you the answer, and that is that that once the training is complete. In fact, sorry, this is from a Freedom of Information request that I had from the Ministry of Defence, which was, which units are these guys coming from and where are they going back to? And they do not keep a record of that. So they have absolutely no idea.
When you look
deliberately, of course.
And you look at the disaster like Krinky, which Kit Klarenberg was talking about, the losses were just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's that discussion never comes up in all of this.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Now, changing topic somewhat onto artificial intelligence, or at least obliquely. Now, it's well recognised that artificial intelligence is very much a double-edged sword. And in this instance, I think what I'd like to do is make the case that it can be, in effect, weaponised by various means as a trap for censorship. And I'm going to use as an example a tweet posted recently by somebody called David Atherton. Now, he, interestingly, has free speech in his Twitter profile and describes himself as a journalist, although I'd like you to consider whether or not you would agree with that description. Now, the tweet reads that a woman has been raped at the Adelphi Hotel at 8 o'clock yesterday. A 49-year-old man living in Shropshire was arrested. The hotel is owned by the Britannia Group, which extensively houses asylum seekers, although Grok was unable to confirm it is used for that purpose. Now, it's perfectly obvious he can use the internet. The Merseyside police issued a statement which said that a 49-year-old man from Shropshire was arrested on suspicion of the rape of a woman. But of course, the wording has been changed just slightly to give the impression that the man involved is not a Shropshire resident, changing it to living in Shropshire. He also makes the connection between Britannia hotels and migrants, but he doesn't check. He asks Grok instead, which, if you're unaware, and well done you if you are unaware, is the AI tool that is sort of deployed, utilised by Twitter to apparently provide answers to things that people can't think of for themselves. And the algorithm, on top of all this, rewards this tweet with 469,000 views, which is a really important point to make, because in considering what the comments might be about, I think it's fairly obvious that the insinuation here is such that he is certain that he knows the identity or indeed the ethnicity of the suspect. But of course, had he done a little bit more research, he would have found that Britannia Hotels has on the website the Adelphi Hotel listed clearly, a hotel that one can book at and indeed get in touch with and find out that it's not a migrant hotel. So free speech written down in your Twitter bio is all well and good. But of course, the point is that careless and indeed speculation of a willfully inflammatory nature is really asking for the type of censorship that the regime has no trouble in dishing out. Now, in another example, but sort of with a different bent on it, this is a tweet again from this time Andrew Bridgen, picking up a story and doing the same in a sense, which is to not attempt at all to verify the validity of it, and in fact, following any doubt in the comments, has actually doubled down on it. And if you're not able to see, this is the story that's been doing the rounds, now discredited, that 2 British Army colonels and a secret intelligence service person were captured by Russian special forces. Now, there are no primary sources given for any of this on either side. Nonetheless, it's been put out absolutely across the board, even by the Afric Times here via Adebukola Adebiego, who I think is probably Nigerian, although interestingly his news organization, at least on LinkedIn, is listed as being in Florida. Now, this has been reported as coming from the Norwegian Steigan paper, which has issued a correction. But of course, the point here is that these corrections are never, ever brought through the mainstream. So instead, the story is discredited. All those that put the story out are discredited. But what I want to point out is the use of AI. Now, this is the photograph that went with the article, which at first glance might well look like two British colonels. But I'll just take you around the photograph by means of this red arrow, which if you can't see it, I apologise. But you'll notice how the passports, first of all, don't have actual proper text on them, but they appear to be hovering in the air, very obviously not actually resting on the knee. Furthermore, that is not the type of belt that would be worn by a member of the armed forces. That is not a piece of issue kit. And again, the belts are different from one another. Again, we have a missing piece of the uniform. There would normally be a rank slide at that point on the current iteration of the DPM. The pattern itself is also wrong, so that's another tell. And then a question is, what is this? I think it's supposed to suggest that it's part of a PRR radio set, but of course, there is no such device that looks exactly like that. So again, sort of slightly unanswered. And finally, perhaps my favourite is this weapon, which is quite clearly being held the wrong way round. So you can see just over the chap on the left's right shoulder, there is effectively a hand on what should be a pistol grip, except the weapon is back to front. So if you spent any time looking at it, it's actually blindingly obvious that it is a fake photograph, but it was used in such a way as to suggest that there was something to this story. Now, I mentioned that Steigan, where the story is supposed to have come from, had issued a correction, and of course, that's going to be lost in the sands of time. George Galloway also reported on this, and I'd just like to just give an idea of how this can be considered when it is addressed critically. So here's Scott Ritter talking to George Galloway about this, having thought about it.
I mean, war tourism is just another code word for espionage, for carrying out intelligence activities. Having a pair of colonels do this, though, is where I start to where the narrative starts to lose me. People tend to forget that you don't become a colonel because you're a sprightly, young, athletic individual. You're a colonel because you've been around for a while. Your brain may work better than others because it's been stuffed with more information and you've had higher levels of, command experience, but your knees don't work. Your back doesn't work. The last thing a colonel wants to be doing is war tourism in an actual war. So this is where the narrative falls apart. Until I see the colonels paraded forward, in non-AI generated imagery, I'm going to treat this story with a little bit of circumspect.
Quite right. It just illustrates how AI can be used for nefarious ends. Indeed, had the story had any veracity to it, simply by putting out artificially generated images, could sow that element of doubt and make it look like it wasn't real. And I would just conclude by saying the reason this is important is because, of course, the Online Safety Act is dealing with all these sorts of issues and indeed suppressing free speech absolutely across the board. So I would encourage you, if you haven't done so already, to sign this petition, which is on screen now. There'll be a link in the show notes, which is to repeal the Online Safety Act. And as of, I think, first thing this morning, just over 500,000 signatures. So I think a long way to go yet, but something very important that we keep pushing.
And I might add, even George Galloway got roped into that story and tweeted about it unknowingly. So a lot of top accounts basically took the bait on that. And a lot of them have come back and acknowledged that that was a mistake. So fair play.
Indeed.
But this is fake news, and it could be generated by humans or it could be generated by AI. The Grok thing really scares me. And I always warned about that, is that the final source of truth cannot be an AI engine. And this is what Elon Musk's vision of the future of news and media is. He says, in the future, Grok will be the source of truth.
Yes.
He's quoted as saying that. We've showed this as well previously on the program, Charles. So yeah, a lot to talk about there in the future. Let's continue that debate. But very briefly, I'll just mention this. There's meant to be some kind of a summit between Trump and Putin. Much has been made of this, of course, and with all difficult divorce proceedings, Charles, what do you do with the kids? That's the big question. And Zelensky is the other part of that tripod. So Trump and Putin, this is a couple of days ago, to meet in coming days. And then suddenly, Charles, it changes, and it's now Trump's Ukraine deadline for Putin arrives, and uncertainty remains over the possible meeting. So now they're arguing over it. And this is exactly what I had said on Daniel Davis's podcast yesterday, is I said, I don't believe any of this, because I know the Russians don't really regard Zelensky as a party to any enduring political or negotiated settlement. So he's the problem, actually. So this is just going to get kicked back, I think, to square one again. And we might be in another protracted cycle of not knowing what's going on. And in the meantime, nuclear threats are being made here by Trump, threatening, basically telegraphing U.S. nuclear deterrent submarines carrying nuclear-tipped Tomahawk missiles, or even conventional missiles, telling him where he's going to park them to basically send a message to Medvedev and to the Russians that the U.S. is a strong nuclear force and they mean business. I mean, what on earth is a U.S. president doing, engaging in this type of rhetoric on social media? I can't think of a worse thing that a chief executive of a world superpower, especially the global hegemon, could be doing at this particular time in history. But then again, I'm not on Trump's cabinet team, so I really don't have much input in the matter. We just have to sit back and cross our fingers that World War III isn't going to kick off.
Yeah. There's something in the air, that's for sure, and that leads well into what I'm just about to talk about, which is what's being described as space blindness. Now, if you haven't heard of it, then I really wouldn't blame you, but this is the term that's been used by Major General Paul Tedman, who's the commander, UK space commander, and he's just delivered an address at the Royal United Services Institute, and he's describing the era that we are in as being a new space age, and the importance of outer space in global affairs as being never more evident, no longer just a frontier for scientific exploration, he says. Space is now a domain of strategic, economic, and political competition. And he goes on to say that the national dependency on space is being increasingly being held at risk by space risks and threats. So he's straight away suggesting that there are going to be problems down the track. He's saying that there are over 80 nations with space projects. And critically here, and this goes straight back to what Patrick's just been saying about Trump, he says access is no longer enough. We must be able to control space, defend our assets, and, if required, deny its use to hostile actors. Well, he qualifies it, or at least attempts to, by saying no one wants a war in space, and it is certainly not inevitable, whilst at the same time, I would say, making it sound as though it is pretty much inevitable. He says that we've been working across government as one space, so the same language, despite the fact that we're in a somewhat different arena, and talking about effective governance, of course he is. But he does say that we're not going to do this alone, and I think this is a critical part of it. Space is the ultimate team sport, so being clear on what needs to be nationally separable capabilities to assure effects and provide us strategic autonomy. Now, I won't go on and overquote what he says, but a critical part of this is the fact that in order to do all this, he is completely and utterly reliant upon corporations, and he has no control over what they're going to do, or indeed how they're going to regard him and his plans in the future. But he still continues with this extremely hostile language. He talks about deterring and to endure a first mover strike, and only if necessary fight through and win. So this is incredible language, really. But it coincides with an announcement about high-altitude balloons, which again are being considered to be a defence capability. And they say that they're developing uncrewed high-altitude balloons to conduct intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance missions. And again, here we go, the same old refrain, boosting national security and delivering on the government's plan for change. Now, the future use of balloons could, they say, support operations and reliable communication as well as providing information for weather forecasting and climate research. So the sense that defence and meteorology are intertwined is, of course, something we've talked about quite a lot in the past, but interesting to see that it crops up here. And the other thing I would like to draw your attention to is that the nuclear deterrent video here shown on screen has just been re-released by the government, literally in the last couple of days. And one might question, given again what Patrick's just said and the rhetoric that's coming out of Space Command, why exactly, in the shadow of the Strategic Defence Review, of course, published within the last month, why all this would be coming out now. Now, the other thing to draw your attention to, which again is very much related to this, is Skynet. And I reported on Skynet 5 last year, described as a satellite communications capability. But now we're on the next iteration, which of course is Skynet 6. And it says that it will adhere to the concept of allied by design. And this is something that David Ellis wrote on for UK Columns some years ago. To understand where it's all come from, you can go and engage with that, but they say that it's going to have continued engagement with NATO through the Five Eyes, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, UK and US, and other mission partners. Now, going back to the teamwork element, the vulnerabilities of these sorts of programs are monumental because, of course, the Skynet capability is being developed and manufactured by Airbus and Space UK and is scheduled for launch, like all the other things, by SpaceX in 2027. So if the wind changed direction and Elon Musk decides that he doesn't actually want to support this anymore, then the entire operation is dead in the water. And I would just sort of to create a little bit of thought on this, I just draw your attention to the fact that Israel are talking about a successful launch for their Draw 1, the national communication satellite, which of course has been enabled by SpaceX. So it's very easy to see how by inviting people to get involved, which they do at the bottom of their guidance about this, what sort of people will be coming forward and for why. So something I think we'll talk about more.
Will the operation be dead in the water, Charles, or will Elon Musk be dead in the water?
Well, there we are.
Does he have an option?
That's an extremely good question and a very good question. But just the element of corporate controls, again, something we've talked about a lot before, is phenomenal, and it seems to be overlooked. It's never actually addressed. The assumption is made that this will just happen.
And just quickly, Elon Musk boasted that he provides the backbone for the Ukrainian military on the front line with Starlink. So without Starlink, there's no Ukrainian military can't do any of what they've been doing against Russia. So it is really pivotal. And that's just one operation where they're using this and deploying this. It's happening all around the world.
Yeah. Now, moving on, I said earlier we're going to be considering what's going on in the minds of younger people, and we're often to be found talking about the younger folk, because of course they are the future for society. What is it that they're thinking and doing? And I'm going to now go to a report from Willsy, which is dealing with an event held recently by the Cathedral, which is a nightclub with more to it than that, which has been running for 3 years. So let's have a listen to see what Willsy's been reporting on.
My name is Nika, and at the moment I'm a children's party entertainer.
My name is Ben Weller. I work for an anti-abortion organisation called SPUC.
I'm Preston Bates. I'm an independent journalist and entrepreneur.
My name is Matthew Glamore, and I run this club, which is the Cathedral.
Just come in for a little social meet-up. Haven't seen people in ages, so thought I'd come out with some like-minded people.
Oh, down here tonight's to meet some lovely people. Yeah, that's what I'm down here for.
It's amazing. It's just good to connect with like-minded peers.
Music and nice vibrations from nice people around.
We're just here to see people and hang out, I suppose. It's impressive he's managed to get so many people on the boat. It's great. I love it.
The Cathedral's third birthday!
The Cathedral is a nightclub, but it's also a collective of audiovisual artists, and it's a cultural phenomenon.
That's a mixed bag, I'll be honest. You meet some people who, quite honestly, I outright disagree with. You also find people who are humble. So the kind of people you meet is a variation of stubborn individuals with opinions that are willing to put that forward without being offended and bash different ideas out.
Many seem like very open-minded. I mean, I could have a nice chat with them about everything, let's say.
Not even just anti-vaxxer, anti all pharmaceuticals. That would be pretty cool. I'd like some more friends who are anti all pharmaceuticals. Pro-health in terms of taking care of themselves.
Intelligent people that are down to earth, know their politics, They're genuine sent people.
I do think that we all in general have a different idea of how we want to see this country improved and how we're going to put together our combined skills, initiatives, resources to actually make that happen.
All sorts of different people here at the Cathedral. It's very much an open space, freedom of thought space, freedom of speech space. We have a wonderful, actually, resident communist this evening, which is really sweet, who's chatting away to some of the kind of dissident right. Really, that's what it's about, is building bridges between different belief systems, different ways of looking at the world, different ideologies. A nightclub is really about cross-pollination of different tribes. Artists, musicians, filmmakers, writers, but as well as technologists, podcasters, philosophers, theorists. It's a very cerebral scene. As you can see, there's a lot of people chatting, there's a lot of talk, and that's really what it's about. There's also dancing going on downstairs. It's really an attempt to create something that is bigger than the sum of its parts. It's about the people. The people are the most important thing. And there's some really beautiful and brilliant people in our country today, and it's about bringing them together and hopefully building some positivity.
What do you think about the development of sort of youth counterculture?
The youth counterculture, I think it's awesome. I spent almost my entire life thinking, why do I not fit in with people? Why do I have different thoughts to just the mainstream pop culture? And then when lockdown hit, it actually kind of made sense, because before that, I didn't know why I was on a different wavelength. But the fact that youth are speaking out about this as well is just extra powerful, because we finally have not just the older generations, as great as they are with their wisdom and their other attributes, but we're really cool, I think, in the youth movement.
I think there's definitely an uprising in the youth, maybe it's just I'm tapping into a minority, maybe it's just wishful thinking.
Oh, it's good. It's what we need. We all need this. We all need our own little parties and stuff, because, as always, the mainstream, we need the dissident meetups.
It needs to happen. I think it's happened in America and it's worked well. But I think the problem is here is that we've got bad optics in that, to be simple, everything's very grainy and quite a few people are very ugly, and we need to do what the Americans have done and actually organise it better and make it more attractive to people that aren't on our side.
The young people who are here are finding confidence in their beliefs and in what they stand for, because they're being backed up by their elders. And I think that's been really missing in London for a number of years. To have, it's not validation, it's not about that, it's about support more than validation. It's about being encouraged to dare to think differently.
Oh, England, goodbye. Oh, England, goodbye. Goodbye. Old England, goodbye. Old England, goodbye.
You need to wear swimming trunks in case you go overboard.
Yes, man, we need it.
Well,
they went the distance. Building bridges.
What fun.
Great. Yeah. I wonder if we'll make the cut for the next one.
What fun. Look, one thing I just want to say quickly. She said, the counterculture. It's hard for the counterculture. This is something I try to say at events over the years, is that it's disempowering for people who class themselves as independent or alternative to call themselves the counterculture. They are the culture. At least you need to believe that you're the culture. The counterculture is McDonald's. It's corporate banking. It's mainstream media. That's the counterculture. Yeah. You are the culture. Independent, grassroots, mainstream is the actual culture.
Yeah.
So it's a slight twist, but I think
it's a very good point. You're absolutely right. Yeah, change of mindset. Now, I've had another protracted communication with DEFRA, and I wrote to them in the wake of the Strategic Defence Review and all the other various papers that have come out recently about national security, asking how on earth DEFRA are actually going to make it work, because it is perfectly clear that self-sufficiency in terms of food security is not at all realistic and hasn't been for some considerable period of time. I asked them a range of questions about this, and indeed whether they would consider bringing in rationing, or at what point they would consider taking land back out of what they call environmental land management and back into food production, and indeed at what point they would consider dismantling renewable energy projects that were taking up huge swathes of land in order to produce more food. Now, I think you can probably tell more or less where this is going, but the answer, which was very long and very woolly, was in effect that they have absolutely no plan to do any of that, and indeed, the final question was, by what date will the UK have achieved 100% self-sufficiency? And not a single question was answered. Now, for background, food security, although talked about a lot by government and government ministers, is not in fact bound at all in statute. There are 3 references to it on the statute book, and they're only in the sense that it's a consideration when drawing up environmental land management or nature recovery schemes. So they said that they are engaging with the wider resilience and CNI community, talking about this critical national infrastructure, which of course is exactly how space is being regarded. So all these sorts of phrases used with gay abandon, saying they're aligned to the Ministry of Defence to ensure that impacts on the food supply are considered, and that there is contingency planning going on and all that kind of thing. They threw out the figure of £2.7 billion, saying that's invested in sustainable farming and nature recovery. Again, so not really addressing any of the questions that I asked, which of course was to do with the production of food. But just to qualify that sum would disappear in just over 5 days if it were given to the National Health Service. Now, in terms of how land is used, the other thing I want to just draw your attention to here, pointed out by the Gazette and Herald in Wiltshire, is that Corsham is now being lined up for a 450 megawatt site for a battery energy storage system. And if you're not aware of what that is, then please do go to the farming section on the UK Column website, because there's a lot of detail about the inherent unsafety, if that's a word, of these things, in that they're lithium-ion battery facilities which have a very poor track record already, and that's in a way beside the point. The point is that fire services have declared that they have no means of doing anything about these, but this is due to be going ahead, apparently, although not actually shown on the Renewable Energy Planning database as yet. Just up the road a few months ago, just outside Cirencester at Preston, there was a fire that broke out there on a solar farm, which also has a battery capability. So it's not as though these things don't happen. And of course, the environmental catastrophe is absolutely terrible. Corsham is a small market town in Wiltshire, and this is the planning database, as I say, which doesn't show this particular projected facility. But just to give an idea, that's probably only a 10-mile radius, and that's the number of battery facilities that are already in play or designed to be in play in that area, and obviously the plan for many more. Now, on a related note, in terms of land that's being taken away, we've got the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government talking about the sale of allotment spaces, which was a story that reared its head a couple of weeks ago with Angela Rayner, supposedly the demon in the piece, saying that that land could indeed be sold by local governments, local authorities. Now, there's some controversy about this, but the blog post says that for the sites to be sold, councils must get approval from the department, and they can only be sold where this is absolutely necessary and where the legal threshold is met. Well, of course, it entirely depends on the very subjective nature of that point as to whether this will happen or not. Now, just to highlight the extraordinary sort of inconsistencies and absurdities and inefficiencies of it, there's one instance where an application by Elstree and Borehamwood Town disposed of 54 allotment plots in order to construct 186 homes. And as part of the application, an adjacent piece of land is going to be developed for 100 allotment places. So somebody's going to have to explain exactly how that makes any kind of sense at all. Another issue we've talked about a lot in terms of resources and indeed access to land is artificial intelligence, which is taking up increasing amounts of land. Of course, we talked about Stargate and the project in Abilene in Texas, which is reported here by the Austin Chronicle. And they've got the picture, really, that these sorts of facilities, this is the projected setup for Stargate, is going to be taking over vast tracts of land. But the issue here is one concerning water, which of course is to suggest that water is going to be prioritised for artificial intelligence, something I was talking about just the other day, but is not being confirmed by any government department in the UK. But it does look like the Austin Chronicle is on to something there. And then we're going to go to Nova Scotia in Canada, where there's been an exercise of powers, which is really normalising the restriction of control of access to land. So in effect, what's been happening now is that the minister has been prohibiting access to the woods on the basis that there is a risk of fire. And there, the quote on screen there, the minister does hereby prohibit entry into the woods without a valid travel permit. So the point that falls out of this, of course, is that it's not so much that access has been restricted, whether or not there's a legitimate reason. It's more that to access it, you need a permit. And this is in effect to normalise the idea that there will be some sort of control mechanism which will enable you to access land in the future. And if you think of the way in which the natural environment now is being described in terms of natural capital and green spaces and blue spaces, I think we have to be very much aware that this is coming down the track and seems to be playing out in Nova Scotia.
Yeah. It could be the tokenization of nature, the financialization of nature. These are
Absolutely.
all part of World Economic Forum future projections and programs. So we could see the convergence of some of these agendas through this type of mechanism.
Absolutely right. Now, but to cheer the mood and to set you up for the weekend and to create more of a buzz about our event happening in October, I'm very pleased to announce that our first speaker that we are going to be talking about is Andrew Wakefield. Dr. Andrew Wakefield will be speaking at our event in York, and we are extremely excited about this. Andrew Wakefield, of course, almost single-handedly responsible for changing the way in which a huge number of people in the world think about vaccines specifically, but also pharmaceutical products in general. And indeed, he's going to be talking about what happened to him with his career after exposing what he'd found back in the 90s pertaining to vaccines, but also about a film that he has produced in recent years called Protocol 7, which we've talked about before. And I'm very pleased to say that if you have bought a ticket, you will have digital access to Protocol 7 after the York event, and that applies to you if you are buying a ticket for the live stream as well. And I've seen it. It is an absolutely phenomenal film. So just another reason to get a ticket, whether for the live stream or indeed for the in-person event itself. But Andrew Wakefield will be there. Please come along and listen to him. On that note, we will close out the programme. So I'll say thank you very much to Patrick for joining me in the studio. Very many thanks to Kit Klarenberg, and please do go and follow his material via all the various links in the show notes, and indeed to Willsy with another excellent report. And I just remind you that the German warfare banter session will be going out at 7 o'clock tonight. If you are a member, please stay on for extra time, which will be in just a few minutes. And indeed, have a lovely weekend. And please join us for the news programme on Monday at 1 o'clock. Bye-bye.